My name's Dylan Winter, and I'm going to be spending the next 4 months working at the Pitchfork Ranch in western Wyoming.
110,000 acres of some of the most beautiful real estate I've ever seen in my life.
The Pitchfork cattle start the year scattered all over the fertile valley of the Graybull. My first job will be to help the ranch hands round them up into one massive 2,000-strong herd and drive them to the summer pastures high up in the Rockies, where I'll then be spending the rest of the summer at 8,000 feet, well beyond the range of Maine's electricity or proper plumbing. I'll be living with two men I hardly know, full-time cowboys Lewis and Andy. Fortunately, people round here have loads of useful little adages. One of them says, "Know the horse and you'll know the man who rides it." Andy, the older of the two, will do almost anything for a quiet life and rides easy-going horses who'll never give him any trouble. Lewis, who is still the right side of 30, likes a bit of a challenge. Almost every morning, one or other of his horses has tried to dump him. They've allocated me the steadiest beast on the place, a great dope of a horse called Jack, who's enjoyed a lifelong love affair with his own feed trough.
I'm going to fulfil a childhood ambition to find out what it's really like to be a cowboy.
Pitchfork is littered with redundant buildings. Although by European standards, none of them are old, because few survive through to their second century. Almost everything about them is made of the local softwood timber, which means that, in the West, history dies pretty quickly. The old barns and bunkhouses are so plentiful because 100 years ago, running a cattle ranch with 2,000 cows, calves and bulls on it was an incredibly labour-intensive business. Certainly the summer grass was plentiful and next to free, but if cattle are going to survive a 6 or 7 month Wyoming winter, they need an awful lot of conserved hay to see them through. At one time the Pitchfork had almost 100 working horse teams. And there's no point in having a team without having a ranch hand to drive it. And then there were the saddle horses. Hundreds of those, and the breeding stock. Fortunately for us, the Pitchfork was home to Charles Belden, a brilliant Western photographer, whose style ran from the ruthlessly naturalistic to the uncomfortable side of posy. The hayland at the Pitchfork spends several weeks in the spring flooded with meltwater from the mountains. But this is a carefully controlled irrigation system that's been in place since the early 1900s. And the whole network was built with human muscle and the simplest of hand tools. Miles of contour-hugging irrigation channels stretch right across hundreds of acres of the hayland that borders the Graybull River. Irrigating is a skilled, damp and often unpleasant job, carried out when air temperatures are hovering around freezing point. The system for making the dams across the channels is simple, lightweight and cheap. It's amazing what can be achieved with a few pence worth of plastic and some recycled pallet timber. The ranch foreman, Don Cunningham, is just one of 3 men working full-time on the irrigation system right through the spring. Each field will get 2 or 3 applications of a couple of inches of water. The meltwater brings moisture and nutrients from the mountain streams that feed the river.
This is probably about as far as it's going to go on this set. Next set I'll have to start in about here. See, we're going to curve. The lay of the ground isn't good here. I'm not going to get much out here. I might be able to get a little here. I'm going to try it. Hang on. I'm going to try. I'm not going to get much out here. This may be enough to help it, it may not. hasn't backed up quite all the way it will yet either.
You can't hurry it. You have to wait for the water to be ready, don't you?
Well, it backs up.
It's important
some,
to get just the right
It's starting
flow.
out here a little, see?
Too fast, and the land gets waterlogged. Too slow, or miss a few areas, and the fields will become a patchwork of dry spots where yields will be severely.
Now, should you ever contemplate becoming a cowboy, there's one thing you should bear in mind. They start work early. Disgustingly early. They're up before dawn, even in midsummer, when it's light by 4. It takes you 3 days to ride a horse from one side of the ranch to the other, and in the old days, cowboys rode their horses to work. Now everybody travels in trucks and trailers. And there are times when the job lives up to, and even exceeds, every visual expectation dreamed up for it.
Nice route, Mike. There are times on this job when it is extremely pleasant. It's just like a quiet, gentle ride in the countryside. The cows are all well strung out. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not windy. Haven't been going for long. We started at 4 and it's 8:15 now. I'd love some breakfast, but I don't think there's going to be any sign of that till about 11:30, maybe 12, in which case we'll have to call it lunch. But the animals are behaving really nicely, and it's a lovely, lovely day.
As the cattle come together from all over the ranch, the bulls get too close to each other for their own comfort. Pretty soon, fights are breaking out all over the place. The only way to stop a fight is to try and persuade the bulls that you're a bigger threat than their opponent. Which isn't an easy thing to do.
What about the cows? Do you guys actually like cows?
Yeah, you do. You have to.
You have to be hard on them though, don't you?
Well, at times, yeah. Sometimes, especially bulls, the only thing they'll understand, if you can hurt them worse than they can hurt you, then you win. If not, you get hurt. But yeah, I like cows.
At the end of each day's drive, the ever-growing herd is allowed to scatter across a fenced pasture. Everybody except the cow crew heads off home for the night. The evening is usually an opportunity for Lewis and Andy to spend some quality time with their kids. And of course the cows. But they're not just sitting there. During the day's drive, some of the calves have become parted from their mothers. Were it not for the men and the dogs, the calves would try to bust through the fence to get back to the place they were separated, which could be miles away down the trail. One by one, the cows come back to find their babies. A touching scene. A testament to the virtues of motherhood, sullied only by the presence of the occasional lurking bull, seeking in some awful testosterone-driven way to capitalise on the situation. However, at the end of the afternoon, there's one cow left over, which means that Lewis, Andy and I still have a job to do. We found the calf 3 miles back down the trail, bawling out his loneliness to anyone who cared to listen. Andy and Lewis were to catch him, while I was to undertake the technically demanding job of following with the truck and trailer. Now, I'm told that roping calves takes a certain delicacy of touch. A softly approach is required so as not to panic the patient. Lewis decides to try what is technically called an underhand cast. But cowboying, it seems, is just like any other walk of life. Few things go quite according to plan. It may have taken Lewis and Andy 25 minutes to catch a single calf, but there are people who can do it in 25 seconds. Or even less. Rodeo is now easily the biggest sport in Wyoming. The state can't assemble a football team worth a darn, but it has several world champion ropers and riders to its credit. The sport started out with a framework of events with their roots firmly planted in the skills required to be a good cowboy. Roping cattle and taming wild horses. Events which can be tough on the animals, but even tougher on the people. But for the people of Wyoming, and the Pitchfork's nearest town of Meeteetse, rodeo is not just the biggest spectator sport there is. Whole families compete at every level and every event. While kids in Europe would be kicking a football around, young Westerners practice roping steers. They start out with an event called, rather gallingly, Pee-wee goat tying.
Grab that rope, go. There you go.
Then, by the time they're 8, they're onto the real thing. When they hit 12, the kids are supposed to be old enough to deal with the rough stuff. So, what does it feel like to watch a 13-year-old son or daughter get thrown off a steer?
It's very, very scary, but you've got to support them, you've got to back them, and hope for the best.
They start on the steer, and you know that your sons are going to wind up riding bulls, don't you?
It's in their blood. It looks so exciting to them, and I think little boys have a tendency to want to be daredevils, and they love it.
Are they like their fathers?
Mine definitely is.
Yeah. So it's your own fault for marrying one of them, isn't it?
I suppose. Yes, yes.
The main problem with bull riding, as I see it, isn't so much staying on as getting off, without getting hurt first by the ground and then by the bull, which is where the rodeo clowns come in.
Uh-oh, where are you from?
I'm from England.
Okay.
I'm from... Are you going to take Mickey out of my accent now?
Are you down to south, are you? Southern England?
Butch earns his living by distracting the attention of bulls away from their unseated riders.
Can I ask you why you do
You can ask anything.
Can I ask you why you do your job?
Because I can't rope. That's pretty much the deal. I can't rope and couldn't ride worth a damn either.
When the bulls are performing, you hide inside your barrel, don't you?
I don't hide, I position myself. Not the same.
Why do guys ride bulls?
Because they truly want a way to excel in the arena, and they find that they can display their athletic prowess, get the rush or the feel, the thrill of rodeo competition, and they get a check.
Is there more to it than that, though? I mean, is it an adrenaline thing?
I think it is. I think it's an ultimate challenge. It has to do with beating the odds. Cowboys are big at beating the odds. You know, they'll make the long bets. And even those who are conservative and would never lay their money on the table in Vegas would lay out their skills against anything in order to make sure that they believe they could achieve to that level.
But if you do it for long enough, it's going to get you, isn't it?
Certainly, certainly. Unless you're quick enough or dumb enough to quit early.
There you go. Come on.
How many generations of yours have been bull riding?
6.
It's hard to tell when
At least 6.
How do you feel when you're out doing it?
Well, I would rather they didn't ride bulls, yes. Because there's always a fear that one, you know, if they stay at it long enough, they could get hurt. But as far as being afraid when I go watch them, I'm not. I don't even think about them getting hurt.
Have any of them been hurt?
No, not bad enough to say so. It depends on what you qualify as hurt. But no.
It just seems a mad thing to do, to climb up on the... I can understand how, you know, riding bareback could come about as a sport, but riding a bull just seems insane.
No, but you think about it. Can you imagine the rush when you get down on a bull, as big as they are, the rush that must be? I think it would have been neat to have done it.
So are they adrenaline junkies?
Yeah, sure they are. They really are. You bet. They really are. They, you know, that rush, that's what they'll tell you. My son will say, Mom, you've never had such a rush till you ride a bull.
Has rodeo changed?
Well, it's gotten faster. Yes, it's more, I think it's more precise.
Has it got more dangerous?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. The bull is still the bull.
To gather up last year's calves from the fertile river pastures and sort them ready for shipping to feedlots hundreds of miles to the east and south. From here on in, all the cattle work will be done on foot. So the horses are turned out to graze the belly-high grass in the corrals. Up on the dirt road, long-haul cattle trucks have started to turn up. A few of the neighbours have also arrived to help sort the yearlings into 3 groups: steers, feeding heifers and breeding stock. The grading alley starts to look pretty crowded. As well as Lewis and Andy, the boss man Jack Turnell is also there, keeping a wary eye on his son Joe, who's been given the honour of grading the cattle. There are also a couple of people I've never seen before. A man in a red shirt with natty bib and brace overalls. He seems to spend all morning in quiet contemplation of the cattle. And there's another mysterious figure with a beard and a notebook. He turns out to be the local brand inspector, Arnie Thornton.
Well, brand inspector checks cattle for brands of ownership, time of shipment, or crossing county lines.
So every animal that goes on these trucks, you have to make sure that it's got the correct brand on?
That's right. It's got to be a pitchfork brand or no brand.
Is it, I mean, presumably it's not often now that you come across crooked brands, is it?
Oh, every once in a while you come across strays in them. Cattle get mixed.
But nothing illegal, really?
Well, there's not been too much altering brands here for the last 4 or 5 years anyway.
For the last 4 or 5 years, people were altering brands 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So it still goes on?
Still goes on, yeah.
And how many cows a year do you think run past you?
Oh, it depends on the year of it. Sometimes I've run by 40,000.
So who pays your wages?
Well, producers pay a fee. They got to pay $1 a head for brand inspection.
And the other mysterious figure turns out to be the local vet, Bill Gould, who's also there because the government says he has to be.
We got to inspect these cattle for health purposes, for crossing state lines. To go from one state to another, they got to be inspected to make sure they don't have any contagious disease or anything like that.
And are some state lines harder to cross than others?
Yeah, there are different states have different regulations.
And pitchfork cattle, what are they like?
They're Solaire's excellent cattle, feed very well. As you can see, they're quite active going up and down the alley also.
Are the Solaire's different from other breeds? I mean, they used to have Herefords here.
Oh yeah, they're much more active. They move easier, travel a lot further and faster.
More dangerous to deal with in an alley?
Well, you got to be careful. You give them all the room they want.
Hold that one right there. Again, it's the heifer. Heifer! Heifer! Heifer!
Say that you don't look anything like a vet.
Well, you can if you want to. Maybe it's because I just came from the hayfield and been haying or irrigating.
Have you heard of James Herriot?
Yes, I've read his books. Everything's true. Anybody's about experienced it all.
So the problems he comes across are similar to the ones you come across?
Very similar.
Oh, really?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, they are.
But you're not wearing any tweed.
No, I'm not doing that. It's a little warm for that today.
Then the yearlings are split into batches of 20. But before being loaded onto the trucks, they're run through a precision weighbridge that's been calibrated right down to the last rock.
Coming out! Let's go.
How do you feel when they all go?
Happy.
Do you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Another year's work done.
One less headache. The day you look for when they're born.
Is it really? Is that true? It's the day you look for when they're born.
Well, I guess that's what it's all about. Raising them up and shipping them out of here.
But no sadness?
No, whatsoever. we didn't have to work, we'd go to town and tie one on. Maybe we ought to anyway.
To get to know Rowdy here, because he is apparently going to be my working partner.
The theory is that I'm having a quiet end of the day beer, but Rowdy has other ideas. You just want to play stick.
Okay. Ready? He's the most vocal, optimistic, clever dog I've ever come across. And I'm alarmed to discover that you're worth $1,500, aren't you, Rowdy? $1,500. That's twice what my car's worth.
"5 days into the drive and the cattle have arrived at the bottom of the mountain. All 2,000 have to be driven through a single gateway and up a narrow track. The leading cattle are the experienced ones who know where they're going and make good progress towards the cool mountain pastures. But the back of the herd, the drag, is comprised of the bulls and the lame and the stupid. And it's become a dusty, fly-infested inferno.
Watch out behind you.
It's really intriguing the way the bulls seem to carry more than their fair share of the fly burden. Must be some sort of retribution for their lax moral code. The cowboys are having to apply ever more pressure just to stop the cattle from turning back. But it's not just the men and the whips. The horses also have their own way of persuading the cattle to keep moving. Once the gate is shut behind the herd, the other ranch hands are free to go back to their air-conditioned tractor cabs and finish off the hay harvest.
It's now the middle of June, and home for the next 4 months will be Jack Creek Cabin, 8,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains. The cabin enjoys what even I could forgive an estate agent for describing as a secluded location. The ranch leases the grazing rights on a massive chunk of government-owned land covering the creeks which feed the Greybull River. On every level, it is an astonishingly beautiful place. I've never been anywhere like it. From the lichen-covered rocks to the waving water grasses and the crystal clear, icy cold meltwater streams. And to the clouds that hang around the valleys until well after sunup. It's a visual treat wherever you look. The mountains trap every bit of passing moisture and ensure that the grazing will stay good right through to the end of the summer. soon as the sun starts to rise over Jack Creek, the horses start to come in from the pasture, following the siren sound of the bell mare, which, as far as the Pitchfork horses are concerned, is Roslyn the mule, the only female in the mountain remuda. The bell helps to keep the herd together and is supposed to discourage the local predators such as bears or mountain lions. Ranch horses are generally worked on alternate days, but they all get half a gallon of rolled oats in the morning. Working stock will get an extra half gallon at the end of the day. Straight oats is generally considered too energy rich for modern pleasure horses, but these animals will be travelling 25 miles or more in a day, and through some of the toughest terrain in North America. Cowboys like greedy horses, good doers that will eat anything and everything available. They'll be needing all the energy they can get. The pack mules, Roslyn and Roscoe, seem to sense that they're in for a tough day and have started falling out with each other. The horses, some of them anyway, seem almost resigned to their fate. The daily routine for the cowboys on the mountain hasn't changed much over the past 100 years or so. The skills, the equipment, the horses are pretty much as they've always been. Pack saddles like these, exactly like these, have been in use since the Middle Ages. After all, the design of a mule, a hybrid between a horse and a donkey, hasn't changed much either. Western saddle design stabilised in about 1850 and has changed hardly at all ever since. The only concession to the modern world is the use of nylon head collars. For reasons best known to himself, Lewis enjoys working with problem horses. He inherited this sorrel, called Pride, from another cowboy. Pride had developed this interesting technique for stopping people from climbing into the saddle. Everyone but me and the dogs seems utterly bored by Pride's morning routine. Eventually, Lewis climbs aboard, and the horse passes briefly into phase 2. Which is followed, within minutes, by a rather grudging surrender. Lewis has to keep up the pressure until the horse starts to unbend himself and relax his back. Pride is a Hancock, an expensive and well-respected line of quarter horses. They have an excellent reputation for good cow sense and fantastic stamina. Yet some of them seem to want to dump their riders first thing in the morning. After 10 or 15 minutes of these games, Pride finally settles down to behave perfectly for the rest of the day. And even here, you can see how responsive he is to the signals from his rider. But is it really worth all this trouble? Not to me it isn't. Andy prefers a much easier start to the day, and has, as usual, drawn an easy horse from the bunch. One that's extremely cooperative when it comes to climbing a board. This is classic Rocky Mountain scenery, with flower meadows that can rival anything the European Alps have to offer. The dramatic mix of flora was created by the buffalo. Their cloven hooves and appetites helped to control the grass, and their dung provided the right range of nutrients. The buffalo have long gone, only running wild in nearby Yellowstone Park. But up here, at the headwaters of the Grey Bull, there are still plenty of elk. But their hooves and their grazing habits are very different from buffalo. In the early days, this land was deemed unfit for cattle, so the Pitchfork ran thousands of head of sheep across the catchment. It was a massive operation employing scores of workers. Many of them were Basques brought in from the rugged borderland between France and Spain. They lived in sheep wagons and followed the flocks from season to season, coming together for shearing and dosing. But the land became badly overgrazed, so the sheepmen left. Society changed. And the cattle and the cowboys who looked after them moved in. The Pitchfork became an all-cattle ranch and established a reputation for producing fine quality Herefords. However, the buffalo were migratory animals, always on the move, grazing as they went. They would spend most of the summer up on the high pastures, but cattle are domesticated animals that, left to their own devices, will spend the summer down among the trees. So part of the grazing lease deal between the Pitchfork and the government is that the cowboys will spend a minimum of 5 days a week in the mountains, and that the cattle must be kept up on the hills and out of the valley bottoms, so as to leave plenty of winter feed for the herds of elk and antelope.
I have to say this is a pretty funny way of earning a living. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a really hot day, 8,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm sitting here on a salt block with a horse and a mule and a dog. It's a very, very strange way of earning a living. However, the company's excellent. Jack is 7 years old, aren't you, Jack? And he's a very quiet, steady horse. Doesn't mind anything I do to him. The only trouble with Jack is you walk very, very slowly, don't you? Yes, you do. You walk very slowly. And the mule's just about to take my hat off. Are you just about to take my hat off? Oh, yeah. Oh, you were just about to take my hat off? No. No, it's the camera. That's it. Oh, you like an ear rub.
Mid-August, and as the summer progressed, life in the mountains settled down to a routine, of sorts. Pride continued his daily task of trying to dump Lewis, and his efforts were met with a singular lack of success. Meanwhile, Andy trained Red in his own unique way. But turning a mild objection to the occasional squirt of fly spray into a game is in a different league from the daily bucking administered by Pride. Rowdy, for his part, continued to show a healthy interest in anything that moved, or could be moved. Days were spent flushing cattle out of the woodland, moving them onto new pastures, clearing fallen timber off the trails used by cattle to move around the mountain. Fixing gates. Shoeing horses. Fetching water from the spring. Getting food from the bear box. And, of course, taking cold showers.
Well, we're having what they call a Cowboys Sunday, by the looks of things. Fearsome thunderstorms, it's bucketing down with rain. I'm just sitting here with nothing to do really. It's too wet to go out and shift cattle around. And the truck is bogged down. And that means that the road coming up here is too wet for anybody to get up here. And so there's not much else to do other than sit around and read and listen to the rain and watch it fall. The other thing is that poor old Rowdy really hates thunderstorms.
take pictures of me when I'm sitting here bald-headed.
Cleaning your boots.
I'm oiling my boots. I'm making them waterproof.
Cowboy Sunday, eh? We're marooned. Yeah, we're marooned. Joe's not going to come and get us. Man. This is the food cupboard. In it we have, of course, loads of cans of baked beans, cans of something called Sloppy Joe, which is basically kind of mashed up beef. There's beef stew. There's tomato sauce, salsa, Skippy, that's peanut butter. There's loads of comfort food, Fig Newtons and fudge shoppy s'mores, fudge covered graham cookies with marshmallow filling. And most importantly, there's huge boxes of pancake mix, because every morning we have a huge breakfast of pancakes, which is really interesting because I read in the book that in the old days, ranchers living this way, or cowboys living this way, would always have a big breakfast and a big evening meal and no lunch, and that's just what these guys do. The trouble is that when I have a big breakfast, it kind of opens up the pipes and I get really hungry. I'm absolutely ravenous come about 2 o'clock, and it might be 3 or 4 before we get back here, and then we have a snack, and then we have a massive, massive evening meal at about 6:30 or 7. But generally, the food is good, and although I'm taking a lot of exercise, I am putting on weight. Mrs. Winter won't be pleased.
Wait, just wait.
I always knew cowboys were sentimental folk, and here he is, crying his eyes out over the onions. What are we having tonight?
Onions. Let's cut another one up.
Oh,
son of a bitch.
Taters, onions, and T-bone.
And biscuits.
And biscuits. I'm cooking the biscuits.
They're not really biscuits, though, are they?
Look here.
And what are the vegetables we're having? You know, sort of green vegetables?
Well, since you want vegetables, we can have green beans.
Yeah, that'd be good. The government and the environmentalists want the cattle to stay up on the hills and ridges, where they will help the wild flower meadows to thrive, and the cattle will also be kept well clear of the creek beds and woodland, where the real locals want to spend most of their lives.
regular salting trips certainly help to keep the cattle in the right place. But the grazing down around the creeks and the timber is awfully tempting. Bad weather can drive the cattle down off the exposed slopes. So for the cowboys and me, most days are spent winkling the cows out of the trees. Which is where the dogs come in. The most experienced is a 5-year-old heeler called Sammy. The baby of the pack is the 1-year-old border collie called Shelby. And then there's Rowdy. The first job for the dogs is to help find the cattle. Often well hidden among the trees. Once the cattle are out in the open, the dogs really come into their own in driving them up into the hills. And Rowdy, it turned out, was a bit of a neophyte. Didn't really know what he was supposed to be doing. He'd never been fully trained. Bit like me, I suppose.
Rowdy, if you send him out, he'll just work back and forth, and he never really heads for one cow. Like Sammy, if there's a cow that's dry.
Another weekend occupation for the cowboys is to go and help the neighbours with their cattle. Especially if it involves horsework. In this case, it's weaning and injection time. It's extremely traumatic for the calves because they not only get separated from their mothers, but they also get no less than 4 injections. And an ear tag. The cows also find it distressing. For generations, the cattle have been bred for their strong maternal instincts. They need to be good mothers to protect their calves against predators such as coyotes and mountain lions. So that makes the trauma of separation even more extreme. The cows and calves are brought into a cutting corral where they're allowed to run downhill. The aim is to put a horse between the cows and their calves before they get to the pair of gates at the bottom. For the cowboys, it's an opportunity to ride their best, most responsive horses. It's a skilled job for both rider and horse.
This is the John, or the Dunny, or the Dump. It's basically a hut placed over a hole in the ground. And when the hole in the ground fills up with human ordure, which takes about 2 years, the hut is moved to a new hole. It's got all the facilities you could need. It's got a fly screen, it's got loo paper, it's got fly spray. But best of all, given the size of the pile of steaming human manure not 2 feet beneath my bottom, it's got a can of air freshener. And believe you me, there's not an air freshener made in the world which can overcome the smell coming from down here. But you get used to it. It's unbelievable. You get used to it.
And all around our fertile little dunny spot are the most wonderfully productive berry bushes, which make an ideal home for a family of overweight chipmunks. The more I have to do with cows, the greater respect I have for them. They tend to settle in small herds of 15 or 20. A quick head count would reveal a shortfall of calves because somewhere nearby, hidden away in a sheltered spot, there's likely to be a small creche, with one guard cow patiently awaiting her turn to go and graze. One of the groups had 2 cows which had lost their calves to wolves or coyotes or bears. They could often be seen suckling each other, either for comfort or more likely to relieve the immense strain on their overstuffed udders. As a group, perhaps because of the calf losses, they were deeply suspicious of everything, and when it came to moving them to new pastures, would fight us and the dogs every step of the way. Again and again, individual cows would turn to face us. But it was the 2 black ones which fought harder than any of them, perhaps because they'd already lost their calves and had nothing to lose. Or maybe they had some sort of revenge in mind. The score was to be cows 1, Cowboys 0.
Get that, Dylan!
I got some of it.
I got popped in the hand pretty good though. By my Honda? Yeah. You did.
As the end of August approaches, change starts to sweep across the landscape. Seed heads outnumber leaves. The Rocky Mountain lupins have all but given up trying to flower. It not only feels like autumn, but to the cows, with their heads down in the forage, it must even taste like autumn. Whenever you spot a group of cows on the move, they're nearly always heading in the same direction, towards home. Most evenings, Lewis heads off on the 4-wheeler. A well-placed echo from a couple of rifle shots can clear a draw of cattle far faster than 3 men, 3 horses and 3 dogs. Cattle come pouring down out of every gully and draw. But put the echo in the wrong place, and it could send the cattle scurrying back up the mountainsides. There's just one job left, the best of the year, a 3-day pack trip right around the perimeter of the land lease to make sure that all the cows are out. We have to check every piece of woodland, every valley, every draw, relying on the dogs to sniff out any missing cattle. Government inspectors will have ridden these same trails, making sure that the pitchfork herd has left enough forage to see the local elk, antelope and moose through the long winter. The only sign of the cattle is one solitary hoofprint in the ice by a stream where we camped. The facilities this far back in the mountains are rudimentary. Camp is a simple tent and an open fire. The food is both greasy and unhealthy. A perfect opportunity to try out an old cowboy recipe. It's called grease coffee. After cooking the bacon, pour water straight into the pan, on top of the bacon grease. Add the coffee grinds.
And then you have to wait for it to boil.
And finally, pour the bacon grease and coffee mixture
all over the fire
into a mug. And that is authentic cowboy coffee. Fiddlesticks. Man.
I don't want
Come
any
on.
of that garbage.
Come on.
It's too hot for
Just
me
try
to
a
drink.
bit.
No, I'm going to drink this. That looks nasty.
Come on, Luigi.
I don't think so.
Come on.
Look at that.
Try it. Eat,
Sammy.
drink some. Come on.
It's too hot.
Unfortunately, that evening, both the horses and the weather were working on a nasty surprise. The last morning, cold enough to frost the whiskey bottles, daylight reveals an empty hitch rail. Not a nice thing to see when you're 50 miles from the nearest road.
Now, Lewis, I wonder if you'd care to explain the circumstances under which we find ourselves this morning.
We lost our horses, 2 of them. So you and I have to walk now.
Would you like to apportion blame for this?
No. Shit happens, I guess. Oh, man.
How long do you think we're going to be standing here?
Oh, I would bet 3 hours, probably.
Andy's gone to go and get... We've got 1 horse left, so Andy's gone off to try and find the other 2. And the deal is, if we hear a gunshot from the end of the valley...
Yeah, we'll know he had to go down.
In which case we'll be here all day. Still, we've got loads of Oreo cookies to eat. Andy will come back to find 2 extremely fat boys.
Yeah. Those are the only faithful critters we've got now.
The only transport is 2 mules. And in the current jargon...
And it was just 3 hours later that first the dogs, then the mules, told us that Andy was on his way back. Time for just one more fry-up, while the weather steadily deteriorated, until by the time we came to pack, it was starting to get really horrible. Time for us to head home. Can I ask just one more question? What do they smell like when they come home?
Like cows and horses.
Nature. They smell like nature. They smelled better this year.
Why?
Because they had a shower.
That's the first year they've had a shower up on the mountain. They usually come home at the end of the week and...
At the cabin, the snow is several centimetres deep on my tent. The chipmunks are preparing for winter. The spare horses are brought up and turned loose to find their own way home. And they'll be home before we are. Mattresses are hung from the rafters to stop the chipmunks stealing all the stuffing for winter bedding. back on the ranch, a phrase I'd managed to avoid until now. The horses are happy to be home. The bulls are still engaged in their endless power struggles. And the cows seem resigned to the fact that the winter has caught up with them and their calves yet again.
Well, now it's started snowing down here, all these cattle are going to do is just wander round, bawling and moaning until the cowboys start feeding them. And then they're going to have to keep on feeding them right through till March or April or May. That's 6 months of coming out here every day in the freezing cold, feeding hay to these miserable, sad cattle. I think it's time to go home. I've enjoyed the summer. I've had a great time being a summer cowboy. But the job of being a winter cowboy out here where it gets to 30 below zero, that's Fahrenheit. It ain't for me. I'm going home.
I won't miss the Wyoming winter one bit. But there's one thing I'll not forget.
Come on. Here. Get him! Don't come back to me. Go get him!
Oh, for the business, they're on attack.
Of course, since this is real TV and not Fantasyland, and I'm the only person here, I've got to take the camera with me. Come on.